well to this place. So since January of 2022, Vicki and I have been working on this project of restoring Vaucluse and the dependent buildings. And as I was busy working on the rocks over here where the cabin is, and that's what I'd like to be able to show you tonight, there's a light on in it and we can use our lights to go around to it. I would always ask myself the question, how did we get here? And what is the significance of this place and Spencer County? And what's become very clear is that this building we're in and this property is directly related to the Revolutionary War and the whole American experience of self-government. And it turns out that much of this county is in the same situation that we've come to learn through the efforts of America 250 group and the documents from the Historical Society and other documents that Vicki and I have been searching for as we've gone to Pennsylvania to look at the origins of this house and other references from the Filson Club and other documents that are historical in nature from the various county courthouses. So what we want to do is just spend a couple minutes talking about this place, how we got here, what's the significance, and I'll start it out and then turn it over to Vicki because she has been greatly involved in the details of what's going on. And our objective is to kind of bring an overview of how we see the history of this, get your input on that, and then really try to figure out what else do you know and how we can develop the organizing history of this place. It's not clear to me at this point that we even know the origin of Taylorsville exactly. Who was Taylor? And we know, however, a few things about that period because at the time Carlin was purchasing the land warrant that later turned over to Yoder, and then the Yoder family passed it down to us about 225 years later. And it turns out that the Glisson family is related to the Yoder family through his mother, who was Jacob Schenkel Yoder. He was named after his mother's maiden name, Schenkel. So the Glissons have a connection. We're not descendants, but we're connected. And then, of course, Vicki's family was very close with the Knox Brown family. And so that's the connection of our family to this family. But as I was working on these rocks, I was thinking of all the different things I learned in school and the things that I had read. And I kind of organized them into three different key periods in terms of this place. And it not only applies to this place, but also the whole place of this region that includes Spencer County. And the three different ways I organize it in my mind are around the whole business of the charter, the double cross, and the resolution. This is the way I think of it, and I welcome you to add to it or take away from it, but this is the way I think of it, and this is the way I think of why was this place such an important piece in the American Revolution? We weren't the ones complaining about taxation without representation, although that's what you always hear, and that was a true statement. The issue here was not about taxes. How could you find us? We're out in the woods. There's no road. There's no railroad. There's just a buffalo trail and some rivers and streams. So how does that work for us here? This had to do with the double cross and why people were fired up and were ready to turn against the king because in their estimation, and I think their estimation is exactly right, the king double-crossed us. That's what happened. And here's why. It all starts with the charter. What was the charter? The Virginia Charter. What was the Virginia Charter? Well, in 1606, Virginia had already been named after the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth. 1685, Sir Walter Raleigh says, hey, I want to name a colony after you because, well, we better do something because in 1608, the French had already named Quebec as the capital of the French territory, which they'd already claimed back in 1534 as all of this area. Where we're sitting right now in 1534, the French claimed. And what they claimed was everything west of the Alleghenies and everything east of the Rockies. And it circled around and came down south around northern Alabama, northern Mississippi, Georgia. Everything below that was Florida. French had all the inland. England was over here on the coast. And the Dutch were up there in New York and the Hudson River area. But the French came in on the St. Lawrence Seaway. The Spanish had already claimed the west coast and Florida by 1513. So you have the Spanish first, then the French, then the French make a capital in Quebec City, and then the next year the English say, we got to rethink this. We need to make a colony that's belonging to England. So that they did, and they created the second Virginia Charter. The first one was in 1606 and was about, put a bunch of money together, let's go try to do something. 1609, they redid it, and it was based on what all the people in England believed and knew was the case. It was British law for over 400 years, and that was the Magna Carta. In 1215, the Magna Carta is established. King John was a terrible king. He was awful. And Stephen Wagner and the other noblemen come together and say, you know what? We have to own our own property. We can't put up with this king stuff running off and just running over us. We have to own property. The House of Lords happens and all this that you're all well aware of. So the established law of England is there are rights of the individual for self-determination of their property. The purpose of the king is to defend it. So have a good navy. We'll pay you taxes. You defend our property. That was the genius business model of the British Empire. And it's why it succeeded over the Spanish and the French, because everybody had a stake in it. Well, along comes the double cross. The double cross happens when the French and Indian War, because the French and Indian War happened because the Indians were already fighting, and the Shawnee and the Algonquin tribes had gone against the Iroquois. The Iroquois sided up with the British, and the others had sided up with the French. Most were on the side of the French. And what happened with that charter was that England claimed for the Commonwealth of Virginia all the land from the Atlantic to the other ocean. The other ocean belonged to Spain. They had no idea how far apart it is. Spain had already claimed it, but the King of England said, you know what, we're taking all that. Well, they name it, but they realize they don't really have it because the French were in the way in the middle. So the French and Indian War happens, and the Iroquois defeated the Shawnee. Well, the Shawnee were the Indians that were local around Ohio. They were long enemies of the Iroquois way before the Europeans showed up. And the Iroquois sided with the British, defeated all these French proxies, and that war got settled in 1793. And when the English won, herein comes the double cross. The double cross is that the Virginians had been led to believe through their charter, which had been established in 1609, that they themselves had the right to divide up the land and govern the land, determine how it will be taxed, divided, who owns what, and it's all about purchases and everybody owns their property, consistent with the Magna Carta. Well, when 1763 happens, King George III of England says, you know what, I'm taking this all back. I'm buying this from the Iroquois. The Iroquois were willing sellers. They sold the Kentucky lands, and he said, none of you frontiers people can come on the other side of the Alleghenies. So whatever you all have done in the legislature doesn't count. Sorry. Well, that's a direct violation of the Magna Carta. And those were the fighting words. And that's why everybody here said, wait a minute, this is a huge double cross. We're going to war. And why did they say that? Because they had listened to their granddaddies tell about how they had to leave the old country. And if you were someone from Britain, you already been run out on a rail because you had a different religion than the king. And they were all fighting over the king of the church and the pope of the church, and who's on first and who's on second, and they had enough of it, and they were on the outs. And if you were on the outs with the king, you never were going to be anybody. So off they go. Meanwhile, those of French and German descent, if you were a French speaker or a German speaker, you'd already been hiding out in Switzerland because you'd been run out on a rail by the Edict of Nantes being reversed by King, the Bourbon King, Louis XIV. Louis XIV reverses the Edict of Nantes, so now if you're not on the in with his religion, you're going to be confiscated and lose your life. So all these Protestants leave. Well, the grandfather of this builder, Johannes Yoder, he was one run out, and he led the family over to Pennsylvania. And like everybody else that came, they came down from Philadelphia and went through the southern part of Pennsylvania into the Shenandoah Valley, came down to the Cumberland Gap, and came through the Buffalo Trail called the Wilderness Road. And here they're hearing about some guy in England telling you that the whole deal from the Magna Carta to the Charter in '69 doesn't count anymore. And what they're saying is, we left all that and you don't count anymore. So that's the deal. So that's the way the fight goes out here in the frontier. And the English had hired the Shawnee, who had been the losers to the Iroquois, to come down and capture and bring back to Detroit, where the governor was for the English, as a capture, or bring back their scalp, and we'll pay you one buckskin. And that's what put the Shawnee Indians at odds with the frontiersmen who were coming down here. They didn't live here. This was the hunting ground, but it had been sold to the English through Virginia in 1763, and the Shawnee had no claim because they had lost, and they had sided with the French. So that's how that was settled. So the double cross, it was a big deal with that Treaty of Fort Stanwix that happened in 1768. There was a skirmish in '69, and it was a prelude to the Revolutionary War that happened then in the events leading up to 1776. What happens here then, the resolution, is that in 1773 through 75, you have early explorers coming in that included people that, descendants of whom you met just the other day. Mr. Carlin, for example, his forefather, Thomas Carlin, was one of the ones that was coming in with John Floyd. He was in a different company with Daniel Boone. The man in whose house you're sitting right now, he grew up in the farm next to Daniel Boone. So Daniel Boone was from Pennsylvania, Berks County, Pennsylvania. His family fled England over certain issues, and Johannes Yoder fled over similar issues, but different, but all the same idea: the king's after us, and we got to get out of here. And they became successful farmers, lived right next door, and Daniel Boone went his way, got hitched up with Judge Henderson, and in 1775, Judge Henderson bought Kentucky from the Cherokee through the money that came much out of New York and the Transylvania Company. The Transylvania Company was recognizing the Cherokee's claim on this as a hunting ground, but this is more down in southeast Kentucky, not right here. This was more Iroquois territory for hunting grounds, but they all used the same Buffalo Trail. So it turned out that because the other deal was sooner in time, 1609 to 1763, all the colonists recognized that lineage. So if you didn't have your claim set up in Williamsburg, Virginia, it didn't count. That's why Daniel Boone left with nothing except a bunch of scars. So the resolution led to different individuals who listened to the people in Virginia, the legislators, saying, you know, we're not listening to the king. We need to raise money for the Continental Army. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to continue to sell land, and in this case, land warrants for the real estate that's over here in this new place called Kentucky. And the way they arranged that was through Virginia law that they passed in 1780. George Washington and the Continental Congress had just put together the Army Corps of Engineers just before that, and the idea was that the folks would be able to come out and survey and make land warrants, and Virginia then could raise money from speculators to pay the soldiers to fight the British. And cleverly enough, that would also then incentivize all the investors. Whose side are you on? Well, you really know what someone believes when you know where they put their money. Talk is cheap, but money's real, and when you put your money here, it means that's what you believe. It doesn't matter what you say. That's what you believe, because you put your money there. And so that was the motivation of all these individuals on the East Coast and the colonies saying, look, 1780, the war's not over. It's not clear that the colonies are going to win, but I'm willing to bet on it. So we know about the fella that was named Shepherdsville. He bought a bunch of warrants. It doesn't mean he owned the land, but he had the right to develop the land. He bought those in 1780. We also know there's a fella that was named Flynn, F-L-Y-N, who bought warrants. Same time, I don't know if he was working with Shepherd. This is a question we need to know. But the idea is they bought that in 1780 that then allowed other individuals to come along later, and the later it did. In 1783, when the Paris Peace Treaty is signed, the war is over, and the United States wins against England. Those warrants now are worth something, and that's when you start seeing transactions happening. So we have a land warrant, 1784, that happens on this property, and it's a warrant that then becomes perfected as a deed with a survey in 1791, and then the deed being granted in 1793. And then it was sold to Jacob Yoder in 1801, and then it was sold to us in 2022, right? So anyway, it's hard to keep all these dates straight. But the idea is that these things got resolved, and what we know about this whole area is everything was under a land warrant here pretty much. And the whole thing is, how do you get your property back to that 1783, 84, 85 period? And whatever information you have on that, that's what I would think would be a very useful thing to all of us here. And I wanted to turn it over to Vicki to bring you up to speed on all the things that happened around this with the work that she's been up to. And I know Terry and Bonnie and others have been working on with Robbie. So Vicki?
Thanks. As Sean said, whenever we first got the property and the house, and we were trying to do some research on what are the origins of this land, and what we found out is that everyone would tell us, well, this was part of Peter Shepard's warrants. And so what we know about Peter Shepard, as Sean said, is that he owned a lot of grist mills up around Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He was a very, very wealthy man. He sold those grist mills, and he took a lot of that money and he invested in warrants. So he really bet. He took a huge risk, but he bet that the Americans, that the colonists would win. And so when they did win, what you find is that about that same time, and then another key piece is that his son, Adam Shepard, was in the Corps of Engineers. So whenever George Washington started the Corps of Engineers, a key place to be was to be in the Corps of Engineers. So you've got Peter Shepard owning all of these warrants. He sits in Bucks County. His son is now in the Corps of Engineers, and his son comes out here and he's starting to survey. And so everyone kept telling us, oh, well, all of this area in here is part of the Peter Shepard warrants. And so I sort of took that for face value, and then I kept looking, and I really went down this rabbit hole where I was thinking, there must have been a station here. There must have been a fort here. Wasn't there any in the confines of what would have been Spencer County? Didn't we have, a station? And I made all of these calls. I talked to all these folks. I did all this research. The only thing I could find was Kinchlow Station, which is over at Nelson County in that area. And apparently, a number of years ago, there was a debate about whether Kinchlow Station was actually in Spencer County or Nelson County. And somewhere or another, Spencer County kind of gave up. I think we should go back and look at this. So I'm here to tell you a few things that I want to go back and look at now that we have this land and now that I've done this research. So I think we need to go back and re-examine Kinchlow Station, because I think there's a lot of evidence that it was actually in Spencer County. The other thing that I kept seeing when I was doing this research is that someone would talk about these, like Glissons and some of the folks that have done early Kentucky history. They'd say, well, there might have been a place called Flynn Station in Spencer County. And I thought, and I couldn't find anything about Flynn. So bless Jake, whenever Don Carlin sends us the original deed, and it's right over there on that tea table over there. And so please, it's a copy of it. I want you to I put a few things out for you to look at. But what you see is that you've got, it wasn't Shepard that had the land warrant for here. It apparently was Peter Flynn. So that was very different than what I had been told and what I had sort of assumed, and everybody was saying, oh, it's all, this is all Shepard property. There's no doubt, Shepard had a lot of property. He had about 17,000 acres. And he owned property out in the Elk Creek area, he owned some toward Nelson County, he owned property in this area. But what we found out is that the warrant, whenever you read the deed that actually came to Thomas Carlin and Thomas Carlin to Jacob Yoder, that warrant is very clear that Peter Flynn had the warrant. The importance of that is that they keep talking about the Flynn settlement. And then you find out that Thomas Carlin sold the acreage to Richard Taylor, and that it also included the Flynn warrant. And so so I thought, this is amazing. You know, all these towns know their history. I don't think we know our history very well. And so one of the things that I hope that we can get done is that find out what stations did we have here, because there's a real sense of pride in a county when you know what your stations are. What were the earliest settlers here? I kept thinking, how did they get from Painted Stone Station in Shelby County over to Bullet Station where the salt was? And whenever they were being attacked by the Indians, they must have gone down and eventually down Brashears Creek over to Salt River. But I think there were a number of stations. I think there were at least 2 stations here that had the very earliest settlers. So I really want us to look at that piece. I also want us to look at the Peter Flynn piece. And Mr. Carlin, Don Carlin, who is a descendant of Thomas Carlin that had this property, he thinks he has some of those key pieces, some documents that will show us who Peter Flynn was. And so from what I've been able to kind of figure out, I think he was a speculator like Shepard. I think he had warrants, and so he got his warrant. He actually sold those warrants then originally to Thomas Carlin, and Thomas Carlin is a fascinating guy. I mean, Thomas Carlin, whenever you start looking at him, he was one of the earliest folks to come into Kentucky. He was, as Sean mentioned, he was actually in John Floyd's survey team. And some of these people just keep coming and weaving in and out, and it's just amazing. So Thomas Carlin was surveying under John Floyd, and John Floyd was related to William Preston. And William Preston was a very astute businessman back in Virginia. And he had all this land, and he was speculating, and he was sending John Floyd out here to survey and to make sure that he knew what kind of land he had. And he then employed Thomas Carlin. And so you had both Daniel Boone and the Transylvania Company and Richard Henderson out here, but they were competing with the likes of William Preston and others. William Preston, actually, when he was the uncle of John Brown. And there is a connection to this house, because John Brown was the son of a fellow that started what would eventually become Washington and Lee University. But they were, at the time, didn't have a lot of money. John Brown was struggling, and he was trying to go to Princeton. Then he went to William and Mary. He eventually did finally get through law school, or what was law school then, studied under Thomas Jefferson. And John Floyd sends the message back through his uncle, William Preston, and he said, or through William Preston, he said, you need to tell John Brown he needs to get out here to Kentucky. There is all of this land. We've got to get these deeds perfected. He needs to quit studying under Thomas Jefferson and get to Kentucky, which he did. And as you know, he was a founding father, one of our founding fathers. He he moved to Danville originally, but then came on into Frankfort. Thomas Jefferson helped him design his home, and that became Liberty Hall. And Mary Yoder, the second daughter of Jacob Yoder, married Mason Brown, the son of John Brown. And I think about that girl. I think, here she is out here in the middle of nowhere. Her father probably had little to no education. He left home at 13 because his parents had divorced, and he was struggling. He takes these cattle and horses, and he's trying to sell them and go west. He finally joins the revolution and with the militia. He joins the militia, and his militia unit gets attached to George Washington's army. But she was out here, and I think that's one of the interesting things about the library. When you see what they're reading, though, the type of things they're reading in Greek and Latin. They're reading all the classics. It's amazing. But still, she was out here in the middle of nowhere, and then suddenly you go to Frankfort, where your husband is the circuit judge, your father-in-law, and you're living with your father-in-law and mother-in-law. She was from New York City. Her father was a very well-to-do Presbyterian minister. her father was the, has the friends of the likes of James Madison, James Monroe, all these folks. I can't imagine poor little Mary Yoder picking up and going to Frankfurt, and how difficult that must have been. They did say that she took two things, though, from Vaucluse when she went to live at Liberty Hall. And she took yellow lilies, and she took the yellow daffodils from here at Liberty Hall, or from here at Vaucluse, which are still blooming in the spring. And so I always think of her. Anyway, to me, there are so many unanswered questions. We need to figure out, what stations did we have? Where were they? Is actually Taylorsville Flynn's settlement? Is that the actual origins? Not Richard Taylor, and he took 60 acres and went to Shelbyville and said, let's get this approved. It actually started, I think, with the Flynn settlement that then became Taylorsville after Richard Taylor bought the land. And then what is, who had the warrants here? Where are these 16,000 acres that Shepherd had, but what did Flynn have, and what was his role? So, I think there's so many unanswered questions that as I've gotten into this, you can really go down a rabbit hole quickly, as you might guess. But I also think they're really important things to know, and I think that they allow us to have a better understanding of place and an appreciation of place and pride in the county that we live in. So to me, those are very important. We particularly need to know, what's the history of Taylorsville? How did it start? Who started it? And because if you know those kinds of things, particularly as we're heading into the 250th anniversary, of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, how much more pride can we have but the wonderful folks that came in here, what they did to be able to perfect their deeds, and have that kind of pride of place. So I'm hoping that as we kind of take this journey together, head toward the America 250 and the 250th anniversary, that we will continue to look at these issues, work on them. Our little committee it's small but mighty. We only started out with 2 or 3 Revolutionary War soldiers. We're now up to 61. 61. It's amazing. All these cemeteries that have been, identified now, where you've got Revolutionary War soldiers, and as Terry says, we're going to move on to Civil War next. So this is going to go on and on. But I think it's very important for our county and to have a deeper sense of pride in where we came from, because we've got some really magnificent folks that were here, and their roles are just amazing. When you think about the inventor of the flatboat, the first person to go down the Ohio and the Mississippi and make a successful commercial venture down the Ohio and the Mississippi. Whenever you think about how this one person, how he impacted our country, it meant that you could now move goods, because when you were in Kentucky, you couldn't go across the mountain and sell anything. We were stuck out here. And all these different countries, Britain and France, were trying to keep us from using the rivers. He figured out how you could take that flatboat, put all this whiskey on it and other stuff, and make a successful trip down the river. Importantly, too, it allowed families to be able to settle west, because they would put like a little cabin on the top of the flatboat. They might have a little fireplace in there or something, but you put your cow and your horse, and you loaded the whole family up, and you head down the river. Even Lincoln talked about how fascinating it was to take a flatboat to New Orleans. So what this guy did, this is just one little person in Spencer County, but what he did and what a legacy he has. What a legacy he has. We should be so proud. So,
thank you.
What else do you want to say?
So, Vicki, maybe share with everyone, this room that you're in, this was the men's parlor, as the way it was described in the, this is with the Park Service, the way Ms. Brown filled out the papers. This was the men's parlor.
Yeah.
And
we do have the application for the National Register. I just thought folks might like to see it. It's very interesting. This house was one of the first to be placed on the National Register. They did this in sort of an order of importance. And so this house was one of the first to be placed on the National Register. And to Mrs. Brown's credit, they did a magnificent job, and they have pictures of what all the dependencies looked like back in 1776.
So the rug that your feet are on is a rug from New Orleans that Jacob Yoder brought back.
Yeah. Fell in love with this rug.
It's got a lot of holes in it.
Yes.
The furniture you're sitting on is from Liberty Hall and also Blue Wing 1. Blue Wing 1 was the first luxury steamboat. Blue Wing 2 is the Civil War one that went back and forth, but 1 was already decommissioned by then. The chandeliers in the room are from the Blue Wing. So the family stayed connected to the river and got into the steamboat thing. They made money, lost money. They tried to figure that out. There's a lot of things going on with that, but some of the things in the house came from Liberty Hall and that ship. And then,
And I'll just add that the reason that is in the house is that I think most folks don't realize, but Jacob and Mary Moss Yoder had 2 daughters. Eliza was the oldest, and she married David Poignant, that we all call it Pointer around here, but David Poignant. And they had children, but the only child that really lived to for any length of time was Yoder Poignant, that the Yoder Poignant School and all of that. And then he was, the story that the family tells is that Yoder, it looks, best I can tell, I think Yoder kind of lived on his laurels, and he sold a lot of property off, and he was just having he was a good time Joe, he was, and so he goes to live in the Spencer house in Taylorsville. He gets hit by the train there and is killed. Some of the family indicated that probably so whenever he's killed, he has no issue. He had never married. He had no issue. So then they wanted the farm to stay, and his parents had both passed away, Eliza and David Poignant. And so then that meant Mary Yoder, who had gone to live at Liberty Hall and had married Mason Brown, she had 6 children with Mason. And so then they convinced her son, Knox Sr., to leave Blue Wing Landing up and along the Kentucky River, and to come down to Vaucluse and to live. And so it actually, Mary Jane and Joe that we bought the house from, that is directly from John Brown, one of the founding fathers of our country, first senator, and their son Mason and Mary, and so Knox Sr. was a direct descendant. So the folks we bought it from, the folks that were here, for most of the people that we knew, they were direct descendants of of John Brown and Marietta Brown. It's amazing. And, and who they knew. When you start getting into this, it's like because Knox Brown Sr.'s wife was a direct descendant of Green Clay, and Green Clay's portrait and his wife's portrait hung in this house. And she was a direct descendant of the Governor Crittenden. She's, it's just amazing the background and the lineage that they had. And yet they were very quiet, kind of unassuming folks, I think, but they had a magnificent lineage. It was like a who's who in Kentucky.
So tell me, Jacob Yoder bought the house in 1801.
Mm-hmm.
And
No,
then
he bought the property. So the way this works.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, not the
Okay.
house.
So the way this works is that 1784 date, you got the 1609. That's the whole contract. You got the double cross in 1763, but then the whole thing happens in 1780 when Virginia, as the Commonwealth, says we're selling land warrants to raise money. When that happens, land warrants got sold probably to Flynn and to Shepherd and to others. That 17,000 or 16,000 acres would be about 25 square miles, but it's around Shepherdsville and comes into this county, but it doesn't appear to be right here. This was Flynn because of the deed that we have. It goes back to that 1780 period. Nothing could be sold before 1780 because Virginia enacted the law in September of 79. It became effective in 1780. So in 1780, all of a sudden, land warrants are sold. And then when the war is over and the Paris Peace Treaty is signed in 1783, that's why you don't see any movement on the land warrants until now it's officially over between the British and the Americans. Of course, it turned out it wasn't until 1812. But it was officially over for Virginia to be able to sell these warrants, and they'd be worth more money, because now if you have a land warrant, you can sell a segment of the land warrant to someone who wanted to perfect a deed. All a land warrant meant was you had the right to sell to others, divide it up how you want, and then sell to others so they could get a deed. The land did not belong to an individual until that individual built a house and put out a crop.
Like cabin over here.
And so that cabin is the part of perfecting the deed. So the first time the deed's perfected is 1784, the land warrant sold. It's sometime between 1784 and 1791, because 1791, they've already issued the survey. So they've got the crop, they've got the cabin. So I don't know the date of the cabin. I imagine a few rocks got moved around in 84, 85. And I'm happy to take anyone who wants to go out with me to the cabin. It's what I've been working on for the last couple of years. And I can tell you it takes a long time to move a bunch of rocks around. But the issue is there were 8 Carlin boys, plus the girls, and Thomas Carlin, and they were Irish, and some Irish people have it in their genes to know how to lay rocks. And they did that, and they did the spring house. And I think they got started on the summer kitchen. But this brick structure, this was then built by Jacob Yoder in 1801. So 1801 to 3. The space underneath where we're sitting and standing is a full basement with a clay floor, but all the clay that was dug out of here was kilned right here on the property and made the bricks here. And the way the basement is structured, the foundation of the main part of the house, it's all stone all the way around, and it's got 2 large brick walls that hold up this wall and the other wall. So it's just 3 rooms under there, and it's exactly the footprint of this room, that foyer, and the women's parlor. And it's separated by 2 brick walls that are so thick. And the external is the rock, the top is the tulip poplar.
And Sean's
Floor.
gonna make it his man cave.
Yeah,
The new man parlor.
yeah, that's right.
Go
So
down and
anyway,
read a
that's,
Berber or something,
yeah.
and everything.
it'd be real good with the right lights and everything down there. But,
Are y'all planning to live here at some point?
well, we're living here right now.
You are living.
No, not really. We're alive when we're here. So right now, what our plan is to restore the building. So I learned I knew the 3 words, but I didn't really know what they meant legally. So the word restoration, when it comes to architectural law, restoration, reconstruction, and preservation. So they're similar, but they're not the same. So a restoration is where you're trying to take whatever it was, use all the materials that are original, and restore what you don't have. So these windows are restorations. This house is a restoration. The plumbing that was put up in the back and on the second floor about 100 years ago, that's coming out. So the house is a restoration, but I really do enjoy plumbing. So we have approval from the history folks.
The Heritage Council.
Yeah, the Heritage
We're
Counter
working with the Heritage Council.
and the Park Service to do what's called a hyphen room. That's a term I just learned about a year ago, where you connect a summer kitchen to the old structure, and so I got to restore the rock building, which is the summer kitchen. So we'll leave that alone as much as possible, but then reconstruct the rest of it the way it was. We have some pictures. The cabin, the chimney is a reconstruction or a restoration where it's the original everything and repaired. The cabin itself is a reconstruction, so it looks exactly like it did. It's on the exact footprint, but there was nothing to restore. It was all gone. So they said you can do whatever you want with it, but I reconstructed exactly on the footprint. And then the height and everything is the same. Even
Restore the chimney though.
yeah, the chimney's a restoration, and the building is a reconstruction on the same exact footprint with all the pictures that we had, with the measurements that we made based on the size of the chimney and the size of the doorway. In this other room that we've got kind of blocked off, that will have some other event. It's still under construction, but that's the library that was not really a library, but that would fall under the category of a preservation. So we didn't do anything to the walls. These are the horsehair, plaster walls over brick. But in there, that's all they consider that with the Park Service to be furniture. Now it looks built in, and it is, but we didn't really attach it and drill holes in the walls. We attached it just to some wood. So I mean, it's in there. It's not moving, but it's top to bottom, and that would be a preservation project to preserve the books. All those books in there are the books of the house that they really have no street value, but they have a lot of historical value for this property and the story, because you can tell everything about a person by the books that they're reading and what they spent their money on. So when someone spends their money on something, and books cost a lot back then, that's what they believed in. They thought it was important to have it. So we're preserving all that, and
Those books were all up on the third floor, up in the attic.
yeah, they were in the attic.
And they were in terrible shape.
So Vicki and Robbie spent a whole year cleaning these books, and then I had my man Stuart work. He's a wood guy, and he's the one that's done the restoration work with the wood. I'm the rock guy, and Stuart was the wood guy. And the public or the Park Service, they place a high value in an old house to put in central air and heat, because it has to do with preservation. You see what I mean? So that's so preserving it. So water's not a part of preservation, but closing off the windows. If you're going to do something to a window, you can only add the storm window on the inside. There's all kinds of rules about it. They like you to put in the security, which we've done. We've got electricity, but we've tried to hide it. We're not going to do anything to this. This is part of the history of the house. But the electricity is a key part of preservation, even though it doesn't fit with restoration. So it's a constant tension between those three terms, and that's what we've been busy trying to work through.
Well, and as Sean said, when we brought the books down, we actually, after cleaning them, we actually went through and looked at each book and sorted it based upon whose name was in the book. And most of the books had a name and are a book plate. And so what you'll see in there is that we've been able to arrange, starting with the oldest all the way to the last one is Mary Jane and Joe. We have been able to separate them and say, this belonged to John Mason Brown, this belonged to Margaretta Brown, this belonged to John Brown. So we've been able to segregate them, and you do learn a lot about a person whenever you see the books they read, and you start putting it together, and you see that you really feel like you have a connection with that person.
Do you go back to the Yoders at
Yes.
that farm?
Yeah, it goes up. There's just a few that Jacob and Mary had, and then Eliza's got a lot of the books in there. I think they were very proud. I mean, these books probably cost a lot of money, so they put their name in there. They had book plates. They're beautiful. And so I'll just say this too, that whenever we bought the farm and the house and so forth, then we were at the closing, and Mary Jane and Joe said, well, I guess we need to give you a key to the house. And I said, oh yeah, okay. And so she handed me this. And I thought, I laughed, and then she goes, oh no, I'm serious, that's the key to the house. And so this is the key to the house, and so it's the only thing that will open the front door. And there's a picture of the lock on the front door. Oh, there it is right there, you can see it. This is an article that appeared in the Courier Journal magazine in 1952, and it shows the Hereford cattle that they had in the house. It also shows in what great shape this house was in. And it also talks a lot. Here's a picture of the cabin before the country fell into it. Jacob Yoder put 6 pecan trees out the back here. And when we bought it, there was only 1 pecan tree left. It finally fell about 2 months ago when we had a storm. And I can tell you from all of the boxes and the trunks and all the stuff that I've gone through, there must have been 1,000,000 pecan holes in this, because these little mice, and they had hands of tobacco. They would put hands of tobacco in trunks, and I would open up the trunk and I go, oh my God. You know, and it was just like the rats and the mice and all this stuff had been in there and eaten, and they had hauled in all of these pecans. But anyway, the last pecan tree finally went. The last thing that also the piano, you want to talk about the piano for just a minute, Sean?
So this is a
Because
Myers,
the family left a lot of furniture here.
this is a Myers piano that company's not in business anymore, but their claim to fame was a metal piece that kept it in tune that all the subsequent pianos use. So Steinway.
They were big competitors.
So
to
anyway,
Steinway.
that piece was purchased by the family after 1851. And what had happened was there was a show going on that came to Louisville, and it was through New York, and it was P.T. Barnum, and he had hired a singer. They made a movie about it, this Jenny Lind. And Jenny Lind was a good singer. There's no recordings of her because it's before recordings, but that was the story, that she was the best singer in Europe, and he heard about her and put her on tour, and he had a whole bunch of other folks on the tour with him. None paid as much as her, but one of the individuals that was on the tour was a new songwriter, and that was a fellow that was living down in Bardstown at a judge's house, Judge Rowan, and he wrote a tune.
Stephen.
Yeah, it was Stephen.
Cousin
And
Stephen.
Stephen Foster wrote a tune, and the tune's kind of famous now in these parts. And it was first sung when Jenny Lind sang it in Louisville in 1851 at the show.
Being accompanied with this.
And this was the piano that accompanied it.
was purchased to accompany Jenny Lind
So-
when she was doing her concert.
So my old Kentucky home was performed for the first time on this piano.
Oh, wow.
I want to tell you, Bonnie and I were invited to Mary Jane's wedding. Mr. Knox Brown had her when he was, I think my dad said he was 62. And so they had the wedding down at the Baptist church. And he had a stroke, and his left side of his face was drooping, and he was totally bald. And I think he was 84 at the time. And then we were invited out to the reception, and when he turned, and when he gave Mary Jane away, he turned and just broke down. I've never cried at a wedding, except at that wedding. It was, I can remember that. Bonnie, you remember that, don't you? He just leaned
a
over.
white sport coat and
Yeah.
a black tie,
And just leaned.
tears were rolling down his cheeks.
So then they had
The
a
contrast between the young daughter and the older father was just amazing.
And then he had the reception out here, and we still remember Mr. Knox standing out here on the portico in his white coat and leaning over and shaking everybody's hand and welcome to the reception here. And it's something that you just never.
Well, and I've heard about this reception for years, about how wonderful it was and how special it was. And my grandmother, I love recipes, particularly recipes that are handed down in families. So my grandmother kept saying, oh, this lemon icebox pie that Christine Stone makes. Because Christine Stone was someone that did a lot of catering in this area, and she lived in a little cabin right down here by the road, and she took care of the Brown family, but she also did catering. So anyway, finally I thought, I'm going to do a cookbook on old family recipes in Spencer County. So because remember, I just did a little cooking column for a while. And it's amazing how much you find, because people send you their recipes. so I thought, I'm gonna collect all of these, and so, but I thought, I've gotta have that lemon icebox pie, because my grandmother talked about that, and it's so special, and it was, she said, oh, when you go to Miss Knox Brown's, you know, you get lemon icebox pie. Well, I called up Christine, and I don't know whether she just didn't want to, you know, because there are folks that don't like to share the recipes. But when I called her and I said, I tried to explain to her who I was and how I was really wanting this lemon icebox pie recipe, and she would just sort of cut me off, and she was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, oh, but my grandmother and my mother talked about this lemon icebox. Well, I didn't get anywhere. But I had spent days, every piece of paper I'm looking to see, oh, lemon icebox pie, lemon icebox pie. I do have the recipe book that was probably, it's at least Eliza's recipe book. It's right behind you. It's one of the recipe books I found in here. And I made gingerbread to commemorate it, because it's her recipe at the top. She says, excellent gingerbread. And then she also has a recipe there for Charlotte Russe and for cookies. And so I thought maybe you would really enjoy having gingerbread. And I put the recipe book there so that you could see it.
What we can do is, when we leave this room, if everybody promises not to touch the books, I know it's almost irresistible, but we're getting glass doors and all that, and I don't have the top done yet. So it's still being reconstructed, but I'm happy for you to come through I guess we're calling it the library, but that was the women's parlor. The rest of the house is under construction, so we're not going there.
We
But,
can go to the one bedroom though.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
you can do
You
that.
have to see the bed.
And then anybody who wants to can come out to the cabin if you wish. It's a little bit dark, but I think we all have flashlights now. Anybody that's not afraid to go out there, you can go out there on the way home.
Let me move this too.
Thank you very much for coming.
I have to get you exactly the way it was, but poor little Mary. She wasn't a looker. And so Margaretta was writing her friends and saying, well, she seems like, like she's got a good personality. And she said she is no looker. But she did say, but I think she comes financially means. And I thought, okay. But Mary Yoder, Mason died maybe 10 years after they married. I mean, they had 6 children. But when you go to Liberty Hall or any other, they talk in such great terms about Mary Yoder. She kept that family together. She kept their assets together. They really credit her with keeping all of it together. And then when she passed away, she kept it all intact. So she was, I think, really quite the business person. And even though she was poor little Mary Yoder, and she left Vaucluse and went to live up in Frankfurt in the big house, I think she was the tough one. She spent most of her time at Blue Wings Landing at their farm up on the Kentucky River. She loved it there. She loved it there much more than she liked being in Frankfurt.
Tell us about the,
Yeah, you take a picture now. It's all messy. Yeah, let me turn the lights.
I'm gonna take a detour.
Was the trash from all years, like,
Yeah.
100 years worth of trash or 200 years worth of trash?
Well,
or
they had pulled things out, and documents and letters, and it was just scattered everywhere, and, it was just, yeah. But, and up there, those are all quilts, old quilts. And one of the quilts is the quilt that you saw in the 1952 article that Mrs. Brown was holding a quilt, and she was in this bedroom. And so we'll probably show that at the America 250 next July 4th. I think we're going to get it. The Filson Club has come out to look at it, and they're bringing somebody else that knows more about textiles. But all these quilts, see that box under there? Those, I don't know where they got these things, but they were here, they were up in the attic, and you would open it up, and it was correct. But they had the hands of tobacco were almost perfectly fine. The rest of it was a
Creatures didn't want to eat that.
All the books that you found?
Doesn't your bed look like this, baby? Doesn't your bed look like this? Don't you get, don't you crawl up about, 3 feet to get in bed? Yeah, the steps are to get in the bed.
How tall or how deep are the?
Well, we've got a couple of mattresses,
right.
well, and mattresses
Oh.
on here, but it's tall.